Yes, indeed, boys and girls, it is electric. Lars Ulrich hitting you from Northern California, San Francisco, somewhat live, somewhat direct. Welcome to episode 25. Sitting across from me is my sidekick, Stefan, how are you? For helvede, what's happening?
Good for Satan.
What's going on, bro?
Good for Satan.
What you up to, man? What you got going?
Sitting here thinking about train spotting.
Well, that's fine. We'll get to that. So, we're taping on a Monday in San Francisco, and yesterday was the end of the 40th annual Mill Valley Film Festival. It takes place right here in my backyard in the Bay Area. I have seen, I believe, 16 films in the last 10 days. All the great stuff that's coming everybody's way in the next couple of months, from Downsizing to Lady Bird to 3 Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri, to The Shape of Water, to Call Me By Your Name, to all these insanely great movies. October, November, December is the best time of the year for film lovers like myself. The Mill Valley Film Festival, run by my good friend Mark Fishkin, who along with his team are always gracious and very, very open to inviting us and letting everybody that's part of the Metallica organization come and partake in the festival. What I really thought we would spend an entire It's Electric episode is talking about film. Why don't we play a song first and then come back and talk about my love of film, your love of film, and talk about how the worlds of music and film intertwine in soundtracks. From the movie The Graduate that came out in 1967, this is the song Mrs. Robinson by Simon and Garfunkel.
Beats one.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.
That is Mrs. Robinson, Simon and Garfunkel, that came out on the soundtrack album The Graduate, released in early 1968. One of the great films of all time, The Graduate. Obviously, Dustin Hoffman's coming-of-age movie with Anne Bancroft in the female lead. And I guess Simon and Garfunkel did, I think, more than just one song. They also did Scarborough Fair and...
No, what I will say is that I think what's interesting when you talk about music and film, I think it's sort of like certain smells. You could be like anywhere at any time in your life and you could catch a certain smell and it will bring you right back to a certain moment. And I find sometimes that music and film works very much that way. So I hadn't heard this for some time, and the first thing I thought when, we were playing it earlier, you just see that scene where Anne Bancroft is rolling her stocking. You can see Dustin Hoffman looking, and you're looking, and it's a hot scene, and it's a very memorable one we all saw that when we were kids, right? It's
Yeah, I believe it was the poster.
Yeah, but it's also, there's a scene in the film which is there's several scenes in the film which are quite seductive, but that's what, somewhere in this jumbled mishmash of poster and scene and music, to your point, that song brings me right to that, and being, a barely pubescent young man myself.
I mean, listen, there's some great soundtracks. Some of the albums that are the biggest sellers of all time. I mean, obviously things like The Bodyguard and Saturday Night Fever and some of those. I mean, some of the biggest records of all time were soundtracks. It's sort of, for a lot of our younger listeners out there worldwide, it's sort of become somewhere between a dying art form and a dead art form. I don't really think that soundtracks really resonate at the level that they did 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. If you take a movie like Easy Rider, which came out, I think in 1969, I mean, there's a song like Born to Be Wild, which was the main song from that. I mean, this became almost synonymous with the going out and losing yourself period in America, and about the generational cliffs and, all that type of stuff. So, I mean, there's some movies where music is basically synonymous with film and vice versa.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. You were saying that it's a dying art, or maybe a shifting art, the soundtracks these days, which have become much more song-heavy and playlist-heavy. I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy Volumes 1 and 2, they're very well curated and very, very carefully assembled playlists to bring you to an era. But there is also, a lot of great instrumental soundtrack work, which I think is far more prevalent for the films from the 60s and 70s that we would like. I mean, Kubrick always worked with brilliant people. One of your favourite films, I believe, and you can address this, is Midnight Express. And
That's
Giorgio,
right.
And Giorgio Moroder with, well, you should get into it because I know that you love that scene and you were telling us.
Well, no, I mean, Midnight Express was the first movie that I saw that really made a difference, that I became sort of obsessed with. You know, I can be accused of having a somewhat obsessive personality with things that I really embrace. And when I saw Midnight Express, I believe it was it 78 or 79, I was just floored. I'd never seen a movie quite like it. You know, I so related to the character and to the whole setting of this film. In the days after I saw the movie, I went out and I bought the book that was written by the lead character, Billy Hayes, and I bought the soundtrack. I read the book, I listened to the soundtrack every day. I saw the movie probably like a half a dozen times in the next couple of months after it came out, and I would sit in my room and lose myself in the soundtrack. Giorgio Moroder, who did, I believe, most of the music, if not all of it at that, he was very instrumental in movies like Scarface and some of those other movies that came out.
And he was huge. I mean, let's remember as well, he's huge on the disco scene as well. I mean, Donna Summer and all of that. I mean, he was a huge mover of early electronic house music and dance music and so on as well.
That's right.
Beats One.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.
I've talked a lot in the last few years about the importance of film as a creative outlet for me. Until I got this radio show 6 months ago, I actually probably follow film more than I follow music. I feel that I know more about film and I pay attention to what's going on in film more than I do in music. Obviously, 6 months ago when this radio show landed in my lap, I feel like it's reignited an interest in music again and hearing a lot of great music that's out there. But for many, many years, I sort of felt that music was kind of at a standstill and there was not a lot happening. There was not a lot of boundaries being pushed. Obviously, you know, my kids will disagree with me on the Kendrick Lamars of the world, but I felt that, you know, film was still a medium where there was much more being said in terms of progressing the creative element of it forward. So I follow film a lot more than I have followed music in the last 5 or 10 years. And I think that it's really interesting when you can really immerse yourself in film, and just for the purpose of this radio show to try to get, you know, places where they sort of intersect, you know?
And to the point, again, just to return to that point of soundtracks and how they've become playlists versus maybe back in the day, they were atmospheres and moments. I mean, you know, some of the most iconic film music, and I think we both agree, is lyricless. There aren't vocalists, there aren't lyrics, there aren't words. The words are made with the instruments or the scene or the moment. I mean, again, I think Wendy Carlos, Rachel Elkind did it with the theme song for The Shining, and obviously Kubrick did it with Clockwork Orange, and your good friend Ennio Morricone has done it with many,
well, all the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns, you know, Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more. Obviously the legendary Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is probably one of the most, 5 or 10 most signature sound. I mean, when you hear that whistle, which should be coming in any second now, then immediately you just think of this movie and you think of Clint Eastwood.
Immediately,
you think of that image.
Wah, wah, wah. Yeah,
and you just think of that image, but you think of not just Clint Eastwood, you think of the character.
Yes.
You think of the hat. You think of the carpet. I was going to say carpet. He's not wearing a carpet. He's wearing what is he wearing? Come on. A poncho. Obviously, two of the most prominent and respected directors of our time, Martin Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino, have a very, very big association with music. Obviously, Quentin Tarantino, starting with Reservoir Dogs and up through Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown and the Kill Bills. And what Tarantino was credited with was kind of bringing a lot of songs in that were incredibly moody and that really set a tone for a particular scene, but a lot of these songs were not very well known or even got sort of a resurgence thanks to Tarantino, because they were songs from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, that were in some cases hits, but in other cases very obscure, deeper cuts by those particular artists.
Right, I mean, I know that one of the ones that you always used to talk about was on Reservoir Dogs, Stuck in the Middle of You. That's one that, I mean, if I put that to you now, what do you see?
Well, that song is synonymous. I mean, Stephen Wright is the DJ on that radio station that's playing in the warehouse.
Joe Egan and Jerry Rafferty were a duo known as Steeler's Wheel. when they recorded this Dylan-esque pop bubblegum favorite from April of 1974. That reached up to number 5 as K-Billy's Super Sounds of the 70s continues.
When I first saw that film in the end of 1992, I saw it in Paris when we were on tour. I'd never seen a film that did two things. Number one, where all the sequences were out of order, out of timeline. That was something that he was the first one to do it in a way that resonated, at the level that it did. And secondly, when you hear a song like Steelers Wheel Stuck in the Middle with You, I mean, you just go straight to the Michael Madsen scene with the cutting off the poor fellow.
Here today, gone tomorrow.
Here today, gone tomorrow, that's right. So some of these songs just become the soundtrack to these visuals that you have of when you think of your particular relationship with a film.
Jungle Boogie would be another Tarantino thing that I think you immediately...
Pulp Fiction,
massive. I mean, you always, when you hear that, it's such an immediate visual. I mean, I just see Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, how could you not? You just see him throughout the film. And that moment, that song, I mean, it's tabbed to a certain moment in the film, but it's Samuel L. Jackson.
I mean, listen, I'll tell you, I mean, I have talked about this publicly when people ask me about the biggest blunders in, Metallica's career and things that I've been a part of. I would say that Tarantino called me up and asked if he could come and meet. And so we had dinner not far from where we're sitting now, and he basically said he was writing and prepping his next movie. It was Kill Bill, and he told me that he had written 2 scenes specifically around Enter Sandman and Sad But True, and whether we would give him those songs for the Kill Bill movie. And at that time, we were in a little bit of a disarray. It was just kind of in some kind of monster period. James was away for some time sorting his stuff out, and things were a little disorganized.
Discombobulated
in the Metallica camp.
I remember it, yeah.
And,
I remember it well.
He sent me the script. But what's interesting is that not only did he send me the script to read, but he sent me a CD of music that he had picked for the movie already, along with the script.
Do you still have it?
I have it somewhere, yeah. And I think it's interesting that the music figured so prominently in the writing of the movie that he told me he was writing 2 scenes around Enter Sandman and Sad But True, 2 of the fight scenes between the Daryl Hannah character and somebody else. And then he sent me the script and with a CD, and then I read it, and then this happened and something else happened, and we were all over the place, and it was sort of left in the ether, unfortunately. I've since apologized to him profoundly.
That is amazing. I mean, to inject a little humor in this, I find it flabbergasting. What was the reason? Did you not like the script? Could you not wrap your head around it?
I've talked about this publicly. There was a period of, it was unfocused. We were unfocused, and we just couldn't get it together.
And one more question. Having seen the script and having read it, and having known that he had written 2 scenes around these songs, did you, when you saw the film, notice whether those scenes had changed according to the song that was then put there? Like, did he then say, "Oh,
yeah"?
well,
There was what I noticed.
I'm changing it.
What I noticed was there was different music used, and and it wasn't Enter Sandman and Sad But True, and it was difficult for me to watch.
Piece 1.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.
Okay, you mentioned Scorsese, and you mentioned, when you think of Scorsese films and songs, give me a couple.
Well, obviously Scorsese and the Rolling Stones sort of go, I don't know if synonymous, but he's always proclaimed his love for the Rolling Stones at the highest level, and songs like Sympathy for the Devil and songs like Give Me Shelter have obviously been featured prominent in most of his movies. He even directed the Rolling Stones movie from the Apollo a couple of years ago, and obviously has proclaimed himself publicly to be a huge Stones fan.
When we talk about Gimme Shelter, I always think of The Departed and the very opening scenes with Jack Nicholson, and you can hear it. It's an instant. Whenever I hear Gimme Shelter now, I'm sorry, Mick and Keith, that's what I think of.
I know, listen,
Jack Nicholson's face.
Gimme Shelter and Sympathy for the Devil are 2 of the most, and I don't use this word negatively, but they're prominently used in many, many films. What are some of the movies and soundtracks that made it different in your life when you were a young lad in Bolton?
Soundtracks that, I mean, look, I'm going to go back to Kubrick, and I mean, I thought that what he did with Clockwork Orange was the whole of that soundtrack, and the way he used the ninth, Beethoven's ninth, and the way he had Wendy Carlos, I believe was Walter then, coming in and manipulating it electronically. It was just fantastic. I mean, you know, he was the first guy I remember to have such an attention to soundtrack detail.
But also, I know Trainspotting has been a significant movie and piece of music.
Massive, and you talk about soundtracks that are, you know, how they can, you know, really change generations. Maybe that was such a soundtrack of its era and a generation. It kicked off, you know, it was like, what was it, Cool Britannia or whatever. Right. It was such a spirit. And then when you hear...
Well, it came out in 1996 at the same time as Britpop and Oasis and Blur and all that was hitting the worldwide airways.
Yeah, and whenever I hear... Well, there's two songs in that film. There's so many great songs, I could name the whole soundtrack. But Lust for Life, when it opens the film, amazing. You just watch them running with abandon. And then there's Underworld's Born Slippy, you know, when he's leaving the money. You know, you think that Ewan McGregor's everyone over and he's leaving the money for Spud, and he closes it, and you just, you know, every time I see it and I hear it, I'm just like, yeah, I'm like, he's a good guy, and it's great. And you watch him and he's walking away, and then you see Spud go to the locker and take the money.
Beats 1.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.
Let me ask you a question, if I can, as well, about a time that you were commissioned and took the commission, if I remember correctly, to do a big movie song for, was it not for MI2, MI3?
It was for MI2.
MI2 and I Disappear, if I believe.
Yeah, right? I Disappear was actually written specifically for that movie, yes.
Yeah, and so maybe give us the story behind how that came together.
Well, it came through the management channels, and it was Tom Cruise would like to have a Metallica song in Mission Impossible 2. Were you interested in that? And so I flew down to LA and went to the set and spent the day with him, hung in his trailer, saw them shoot, tried to get an understanding of what they were looking for in the song and what the movie was about and so on, and then went back and talked to James about it, and we were into it. And at that time, you know, a lot of those big studio movies had really big budgets, and it, you know, what was so cool was, you know, to do like a video and all that stuff that's sort of like long gone now, but it was like, we'll do a cool video, and there was a chance to do something creative with the video and write a song. And we were in between, I think we just finished the S&M project, and we were starting to think ahead to do maybe the next Metallica record. So there was a little bit of a lull, and it was like, let's just write a song and give it to this movie and be involved at another creative level. And it was great. At that time, we hadn't sort of done the one-off song, and it was really fun to do. And then we got a chance to make this awesome video, still one of my all-time favorite Metallica videos that Wayne Isham directed, that has some really cool footage of us playing out in the desert, out in Monument Valley,
right, yeah.
And some really cool, like James does this great Steve McQueen-esque car chase scene through the streets of San Francisco, and I'm doing this crazy thing where I'm jumping out of a window, and it was a really cool video.
That's right, I remember that. So, but when you were talking with Tom Cruise, for example, I mean, is he giving you, I mean, I presume he produces those films as well, right?
Yes.
So he's kind of the keeper of the flame, so to speak. So, I mean, is it a full-on, does he say, do what you do, get your vibe, and I trust what you're going to do? Or is it saying, I'm looking for you to bring this from your music to
No,
this?
it was mostly do what you do, I trust what you're doing. He showed me maybe 20, 30 minutes of scenes from the movie. I remember seeing the opening scene with the airplane, with this whole thing that takes place on a 747, which is really cool. And I was just getting a feel for it. And then I went back to James and told him sort of what I had seen and what they were looking for. But, you know, a lot of times with those types of situations, it's do what you do. We want what you do rather than we want this specific. It's got to be 4 minutes and 15 seconds. It's got to be 122 beats per minute, or it's got to have a riff in F sharp. I mean, there's nothing at that level of particularity.
This is a question of interest to me, given that, you know, we've seen Trent Reznor go into soundtrack work, quite a lot of it. Do you think it's something that you would like to test your eye with at any point?
Maybe at one point, I think the idea of creating moods and creating atmospheres, I don't have really any aspirations to be sort of like a one-man band and write my own songs. And I mean, that I get way too much out of being in Metallica and doing that in a collective way. I think that, you know, potentially if with the right movie, the right collaborator, it could be fun to do something that was atmospheric and was really about kind of a background type of thing. That could be fun, absolutely.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.
All right, I mean, you know, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I mean,
Okay.
You and I, you know, we like to, you know, we shoot texts. You've seen this, you've seen that. You know, occasionally we'll catch films together in Europe. Okay, and then you tell me last night, you know, I'm burnt. I've seen 4 films in a day, which to me is just mind-boggling. I can't even fathom that. I mean, I can't fathom how you could do it, because I'd be getting confused. I'd be thinking that, you know, why is that unicorn shooting smack in a housing project in, like, you know, space? Like, you know, you get them all confused. So that being said, I can't remember how many films you said you've seen at Mill Valley.
A lot.
Yes, a lot. And just do us a favour here, will you? Will you bring the listeners into a couple of the good ones?
Okay.
I mean, just between us, nobody need know. Just tip people
the movies,
off.
I mean, the movies for this fall that are upcoming or just opening, wherever you are, obviously a lot of these films have what's called a staggered opening, where they open in New York and LA first.
But people are going to be hovering with their pens, or sorry, that's so old-fashioned. They're going to be hovering with their thumbs, waiting to tap out the film title.
Well, what I was about to say before you cut me off is that they'll be, you know, coming. They'll start in New York and LA, which is, you know, where they always start, and they'll be coming to the rest of the bigger cities in America, and then eventually they'll make their way overseas. You know, the best film I've seen this year so far is The Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. Unbelievable. It's written and directed by the same guy that did In Bruges. And it's just...
Which is a highly underrated film.
Yes, Frances McDormand is... It's so epic. I don't need to get into the details of this, but she's a lock for an Academy Award nomination. And, I mean, it's just unbelievable. It sucks you in from the first second. You can't believe what you're hearing.
If you had to sum it up in 20 seconds.
It's about a woman at her wit's end who will stop at nothing to find the truth that she's looking for. And
sounds like my kind of woman.
And what happens to people when they're pushed.
Awesome.
And how filters become non-existent.
Brilliant. That sounds very exciting, actually. Yeah, and written by the guy made In Bruges. In Bruges, of course, which featured a scene about... there was a talking to a dwarf about, like, if there was a dwarf war, they're all doing coke in that scene. Do you remember? Then they're in the hotel room, they're going on.
Of course, yeah.
Would the dwarfs fight other dwarfs, or would they fight with the big? It's just incredible. Anyway, so I'm excited to see that. And
well, last night I saw The Shape of Water, Guillermo del Toro's new film that won the first prize at the Venice Film Festival a month ago. Great, surreal, set in the early 60s in Baltimore. Again, don't want to give too much away, but...
Thriller, horror? He's usually associated with horror.
Yeah, it has almost a science fiction kind of element to it.
Wow, you like the science fiction? You're not a sci-fi guy, I don't think, usually.
I'm not a huge... but Michael Shannon's in it. And,
enough said.
Michael Stuhlbarg and...
Michael Shannon is a legend, so such a great actor. Wow, exciting.
And Sally Hawkins is fantastic. And
she's in it?
Yeah. It's great. And that is going to be one of the big ones this fall. I saw Lady Bird, which is Greta Gerwig's somewhat autobiographical tale of her growing up in Sacramento. When she was doing the Q&A, she used a phrase which I thought was very cool. She says, "It rhymes with the truth." So it's the story sort of about growing up in Sacramento in her last year of high school there. She doesn't act in it, but she wrote and directed it. And shall I say, Ronan plays, I guess, the Greta Gerwig character, and she's unbelievable. Great film. I think that's coming in mid-November also. I saw Downsizing earlier in the week, which is Alexander Payne's next film starring Matt Damon, which is about how basically we've up this planet to the point where the only path forward for man is that we all downsize to the point where we're just a couple of inches tall, then there's less waste and less environmental damage.
But more chance of getting trodden on.
Well, that wasn't necessarily addressed in the film, but the idea...
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
The idea is that it's better for the planet if we all downsize. And obviously Alexander Payne, who is the writer and director of one of my all-time favorite films, which is Sideways, and also did About Schmidt, and who also wrote and directed The Descendants. So it's been a great week. Saw the Florida Project, which was fantastic also, and saw The Darkest Hour, the Churchill film that one of your heroes, Gary Oldman,
and one of yours,
I mean, absolutely plays Winston Churchill.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. I mean, again, we've touched on it, but going back to, actors and who are truly committed, and I think that you would agree with this. I always found one of the most fascinating stories about Nil by Mouth that Gary Oldman wrote, directed, and paid for, and which I did say earlier, you and I probably single-handedly supported when it came out here, but he took on so many of those bigger roles early on simply to get the money together to make that film. And just as you said,
Nil by Mouth, yeah,
just
one of the great all-time films.
Just as you said, you saw a film by someone who said it was about their life in Sacramento, or a hint of their life. Nil by Mouth is very much, if you ever wanted to get an idea of what Gary Oldman grew up in, it's just...
And that's also, you sent me a fascinating statistic yesterday, and I love statistics. You said up until, 2 years ago, Nil by Mouth is the movie that had the word in it uttered the most times.
And the whole, it did. Yeah,
How many times?
The word is said 82 times. It also features around 428 uses of the word more than any film at the time until Summer of Sam came out, which beat it 2 years later.
And I just want to interject here, and this is very important for me to hear myself say this. The greatness of the movie is not because of that statistic.
No, it's not.
Beats One.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.
Off the top of your head, and don't overthink this, your 5 favorite films in no particular order. The first 5 that come into your head.
The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, Dawn of the Dead, Nil by Mouth, and let me think, one more.
Time's up.
Apocalypse, no, not Apocalypse Now for sure. Scarface.
Apocalypse Later.
Scarface or Raging Bull, then it goes on and on and on. Stalker is another great film by Tarkovsky.
Made in England.
Made in England, brilliant. Yeah, any Mike Leigh film you could put in there. And now
You're going to ask me?
Absolutely, come on.
I'm touched. Oh, thank you. Okay, let me just compose myself. Thank you. I would say, without overthinking it, The Godfather 2, Midnight Express, the Al Pacino Scarface, Dog Day Afternoon, the Charlton Heston, The Ten Commandments, were a very big film for me when I was between 7 and 12.
That's a great thing to talk about, those childhood films.
Yeah, well, they're with you. It's like when I show the Ten Commandments to my kids, it makes me feel like I'm 12 again.
So can I ask you about Charlton Heston? This is something I want to know from another fellow European. When you saw Charlton Heston, was it like America? This is what all Americans are going to be like. All American guys must be like Charlton Heston. Because when I was watching Planet of the Apes and every other disaster film that came, I was obsessed with Charlton Heston.
I don't know if I associated the Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments with America, but I don't know. I'd spent a lot of time traveling with my dad in America, and I don't know if I particularly made that correlation. There was a book that I found the other day in my library called Amerikanske Bilder, which translates to American Pictures, which was a very big book when I was growing up. It was like maybe mid-70s. That was a Danish writer and photographer's trip through sort of American poverty, and especially the Deep South. And I remember being obsessed with this book for a couple of years, of seeing all these minorities living in extreme poverty in the South, in poverty we couldn't imagine in Western Europe at the time. And that part of America for me was as relevant as the kind of the magic of Hollywood and Technicolor and the larger than life heroes like John Wayne or Charlton Heston.
It's interesting. That's a thread of taste that's carried all the way through then. because a lot of the films you're interested in deal with those sort of conflicts and personal suffering.
Yeah, I've always found, I guess, the underbelly of things to be often more interesting than this glamorous thing. I guess the whole kind of thing about American glitz and glamour, I guess I've always been more attracted to the darker sides of things. It was great finally to talk about film 25 episodes into our tenure here at It's Electric. Stefan, you and I have obviously seen hundreds of films over the years, if not close to thousands, and you and I take particular pleasure in being both peanut gallery and following film, Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes and reading reviews.
I will say, and I'll share this with the audience, there was a time when you would go to the movies with Lars, and if he wasn't particularly into the film, I would say that the Peanut Gallery was not shy to voice itself in the theatre. I mean loudly. I'm like, come on! Oh.
My wife still gives me the elbow when I do that in a room, in a theater full of people. But it's been great talking about movies finally on the show, and great talking about the role of music in great films and great movies, and how iconic scenes can be immortalized by the soundtrack and vice versa. And hopefully we can, maybe as we expand our horizons a little bit, maybe we can talk more about films in the next few months, and maybe we could get some people on the creative side of film into our show, and it'd be fun to talk to writers, directors, actors. There's a few of those that we have in our Rolodex, and maybe we could coerce them to come in and join the It's Electric party.
I think it would be a wonderful thing.
Episode 25 comes to an end. Next week will be episode 26. We are half a year into our tenure here at Beats One. Thank you to everybody all over the world listening to Steph and I sit here and indulge in our movie fanaticism. Remember, boys and girls, never ever refer to yourself in the third person. Lars Ulrich saying over and out. Thank you very much.
Beats One.
It's Electric with Lars Ulrich.